You are.
Okay, then hello and welcome to our Digital Science Communication Coffee. This is the first edition of the year. Today we are talking about invasive plants with Franziska Sattler and Florencia Yannelli. My name is Dina Schmidt and I work at the experimental field in the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin. In the experimental field, we test different formats and research communication and new approaches to promote direct interaction between science and the public. Actually, the event takes place once a month in the museum, but currently we are hosting it online. We are very happy that you have found your way to us. I hope you all have your coffee cups ready and maybe got some cookies or cake. Before we get started, I'd like to give a few introductions. Feel free to ask questions. You can write them in the chat, or those of you who joined us in Zoom can also ask their questions directly. Just draw attention to yourself briefly in the chat, and then we will unmute you. I'd like to point out that this event will be recorded and subsequently published on the museum's YouTube account, but only the parts in which the input givers can be seen and heard will be published. One last thing, we are always very interested in your opinion and would be very happy if you would take part in a short survey afterwards. We will send the link in the chat. Now I would like to hand over to Franzi and Florencia, who have prepared a very exciting topic today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Franziska, and I'm the host of Kaffeeklatsch mit Wissenschaft, or when we do it in English, it's the Digital Science Communication Café. And we've been doing this at the museum for what feels like a long time, because the year felt very long. Our first one was in August 2019, and we used to do it in public with museum visitors, and I always enjoyed that very much. And then we moved online and I realized I enjoy that just as much, if not more, because I can really focus on my speaker. And we've been doing this every single month in lockdown, except the first month where everybody was like, oh my God, what's happening? And I love doing this format. I am a scientist myself. I studied at Freie Universität Berlin, where Flor is also from. I have a master's in evolutionary biology, and I was a paleontologist and researcher at the Museum für Naturkunde before I decided to do this, because science communication and doing things like that, I just love so much. And when I asked Flor to join me and she said yes, I was extremely happy because I love Flor and she's a great communicator. And we actually met through something called Soapbox Science, where we promote women in science and their research. And I watched Flor in action for Berlin Science Week, where we both presented our research. And that's when I knew, yes, I need her. I need her with me. I need her with me. And I'm super happy that you're here right now. Well, that you're here with me and that we get to talk about your research, because I took one class on it doing my master's and it was my favorite class. And I actually think my teacher, I think you know him, and he was like the nicest. If
Jonathan.
Yes, he's the best.
Yeah,
he was so
Jonathan.
nice. He was so nice. And I had such a good time. So when I learned that you work on invasive plants, I just thought, oh my God, now I can ask everything I ever wanted to know. Because, right, we're friends. So it's the time. It's the time. I'm going to ask you lots of questions. Of course, everybody else can also ask questions. But I think I'm going to take the lead now and get started before we see your research in a few slides. I have a few questions beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we've known each other for a while, I don't know everything about you, and I think we're going to change that now. I want to know everything there is to know about you. And one of my first questions I always ask, which I find super interesting is, how did you end up in science? Do you have family members that also work in science? Like, what inspired you to do this? Are you the first one in your family to be a scientist?
Yes, I am. Not the first one to go to university, though. I come from a line of women who went to university very early, when it was not so common. But I am the first one that is a scientist. And like the scientist part is kind of by accident. So obviously during university, I didn't really know what a scientist was. Like you are more like focused on passing the subjects, or like the short term kind of things. But I did like, since I was very, very little, to teach. I used to teach my brother and my sister the subjects that I had at school.
Nice.
They're younger than me. Yeah.
Did they like it, or were they like, oh, not again?
My sister was a great pupil, but my brother, he was a bit more difficult. I had to put more effort with him, like having drawings and things.
But that's good. That's good. See, that's how you learn too.
Yeah. And then I was like, okay, if I want to become a professor eventually, I have to get a PhD. Mm-hmm. And then when I started my PhD, or when I started my thesis back at the university to finish my degree, I realized, oh, wow, this is interesting. Like, you get to ask questions and investigate them. And I really like that. And right now, I think, well, because of the stage of my career, I'm not a professor yet. Obviously, most of my time most of my time is dedicated to research, and I really like it. So I like the amount of time dedicated to each part. But yeah, I did not know what it was until like very late in my degree, and yeah, then I loved it.
Yeah,
I'm very lucky. We are very lucky.
It was always very different. I hear lots of stories of people, or of guests here, who say, oh, I didn't know I wanted to be that. And I always sit here like, I always knew I wanted to do this, but I'm the first one in my family to study, to get a master's even, and to like study abroad and all that. But I always knew I wanted to be a dinosaur woman. Like, my parents didn't know what that meant. I was 3 and I was like, I want to be a dinosaur woman. They're like, what's happening? What is this? And when I realized I had to study lots of physics, lots of maths, like I studied in geology and then I did biology, and I was never good in the natural sciences in school. I was really good in like English and German. Like, you want me to analyze a poem? I'm the one for you. Like, I was really good at that. And then I wanted to do this very like sciencey thing. And I thought, oh my God, how am I gonna do that? And it was pretty hard because I was like not good at math and stuff. But here we are. It's
yeah. But I mean, it's interesting because even if you might not, I was not good at math in high school, and that really determined that I thought, okay, engineering would not be for me because I didn't love it. But then in the end, when I went to university, I actually really liked it, and it was just different to what you learned in high school. So
yeah, that's true.
Sometimes you really have to check
that
and not
true.
Be already determined. Okay. Yeah.
And what did you do for your undergrad? Like, what did you do for your bachelor? How did you start in your science career?
So I did, it's called in English, wait.
You can also say it in Spanish and then we'll see.
Is renewable natural resources engineering.
Oh, engineering, there we go.
Yeah, so it's sort of like environmental engineering. But it had a lot of focus on sort of like plant aspects, because it was in the agronomy faculty, and in this particular faculty, they are more specialized in plants because obviously in each part of the country, if you study agronomy, if it's a part where you have more cattle, then you will be more specialized in animals. If it's a part where you have more crops, then they're more specialized in plants. You see the other things a little bit, but not so much. And my degree was just very new, like 2 years. And I was in a career crisis because I was jumping from other ones. I was doing industrial engineering because I wanted to then do a master in environmental sciences. And then I was like, no, okay, I don't like this anymore. And started Googling, doing my research on, well, let's see what's out there to start. And I found this one. It was such, like you imagine like the light coming, like, you find it. And it was very new. So in a way, it was kind of lucky that I was not decided to finish my previous degree, because when I finished high school, this one wouldn't have been available.
Right. Yeah, that is.
It did not exist. Yeah. So. Right. And Argentina is not so common that you can move around so much, like in the country, to study in another province. It's more difficult. You can, but it's more difficult. Like you have to have the money to do that. And so when I found this, I was like, yes, this is my thing. And it was really great. Like the faculty is so nice because we are out of the city. And yeah, it was really great. And so I found this. I think the community was great because we were sort of building the studies together, and we still are. Like the students are still very involved in building this.
That's cool.
Degree. And then I was determined to come to Europe to do a PhD, initially in Italy.
Oh, I see.
But it was in the middle of the crisis, so I didn't find it there.
Yeah. Did you also do a master's at that institute?
No.
Okay.
No, in Argentina, degrees, usually the ones that allow you to do a PhD are 5 years, 4 to 5 years. So it's kind of like here, you have the bachelor and master that in total should be around 5 years. So I applied for a grant to study in Munich and at the Technical University of Munich. And yeah, I had to do, like, they evaluated my degree, my thesis and everything to see if it was up to standards. But so then it was
Munich. You came for your PhD, you did it in Munich, right?
Yeah.
See, I didn't know that about you. I see.
Yes. Yeah, at the Technical University. Yeah.
And what was your research? Like what
invasives.
So is that when you first dove into the topic of invasive plants, or did you already do some like that before where you were interested and then you chose your PhD because of that?
No, it was more destiny. I don't know, not destiny. But I was interested in stuff that will be related to degradation. So things that we as humans are doing to nature, let's say, and that affect us as well. Because in the end, you get floodings, you get erosion, you get all those kind of things. So I was working more on that. But then when I got here, I wanted to work on that as well, but it didn't work out. I think it's a very common thing that you plan your PhD and then you have all these big plans. I'm going to do this, and then, things don't go the way.
I think lots of PhD students right now can relate. They're like, oh, I'm going to do field work this summer. And then, no.
Yeah, exactly.
Stay home.
Exactly. So I read a paper by a scientist, so her name is Jennifer Funk, and it was a paper where I was at the chair of restoration ecology. So in this paper, they were proposing to try to plan restoration, to design the plant communities that you will have in a certain area by choosing the species in a way that they are as similar as possible to potential invasive species that might arrive. Mm-hmm. And the assumption was that then these native communities could be resistant to the invasive. So the invasive will not be able to really spread around or even grow
vaccine?
There. Sort of, exactly. And because if you have similar native species to the invasive, that means that they have similar requirements to grow there, so that they will use the same resources in terms of maybe nutrients or the places where they grow better. And so if you have this kind of species in the community, then you will see very few invasives there. So the idea was to try to sort of engineer the communities. And I really loved that. And I went to my supervisor and I said like, oh, I found this paper and it's super interesting. And he also thought like, oh yeah, this is really cool. And yeah, that's how it started.
Nice. You already like answered my next two questions, basically. Like, how did you end up? Well, not actually how you ended up in Berlin, but you were already in Germany. So I guess, you're already here. And because I'm a Berliner, I must say this now, you probably realize that Berlin is the coolest place and the best place. So
I agree. Like the city is very cool, but you don't have the Alps. So
that's true. That is the one downside. I am a geologist still, after all, so I can relate. I love the mountains.
Yeah, but that's the downside.
We already talked a little bit about like invasive plants now, and if people are not familiar with the term, they're probably like, what's happening? So maybe you can tell us now about your research. I know you have some slides prepared. Maybe you can share them with us now and tell us a little bit about what you do at Freie Universität now as a postdoc.
Okay, so let me see, share. Okay, you should see now. Do you see it in presentation mode now?
I see it. Is everybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see nodding heads.
Cool. Okay, so, well, the first is what you think about, what comes to your mind when you think about invasive species. And it's usually, because of the movies and all of that, is green little creatures. And as I said also in the presentation that you saw, if you're my age, probably also X-Files.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking on green little creatures, you're close to my research topic. So I work with invasive plants. But of course, there are other organisms that are also invasive, and I'm going to talk about that a bit. But first, I wanted to show you how invasive species are already now around us everywhere. And I wanted to start this because some days ago, we went for a walk to Schöneberger Heide in the northern part of Berlin. And it's a super nice place. It's actually quite a nice walk through this vegetation. And you have the deers. And if you live in a city, I think, like we have foxes, we see often animals in Berlin, and I love that about Berlin. But the deers I like them so much. And here you can see them really close. So it was really nice to take the pictures and so on. I mean, they're quite used to humans, these ones here. But the other thing that actually reminded me of when I was watching at these deers is that they are actually invasive in Argentina. So in Argentina, they're called ciervo colorado in Spanish, and they are a threat to our native deers. For example, the one in the fellow here in the picture is called huemul. They were introduced in Argentina because, well, when Europeans settled in South America, they wanted to have, or they thought the fauna, so the animals from Europe were actually better than the ones in South America, and they wanted to hunt those, not the ones in South America. So they introduced them there to hunt them. And well, at that point, it was not well understood, like if you put some animals out there, they will maybe spread and get out of control. It was more like, okay, we just release some animals. But not all of them were released, actually. Some of them were enclosed, but they escaped. So they're quite a problem in Argentina currently. And yeah, it's kind of the things that you see when you are traveling around and you say, oh, this one is familiar. It is because they're probably being moved by humans. But coming to what actually are invasive species, I made this little video here. So the invasive species are plant, animals, or pathogens that have been introduced by humans, but they don't need our help to spread, so to move further away from the areas. And the thing that why we usually care is because they have an impact on the native species. So in this case, like they displace them by competition. But in this definition, that is one of the, I'd say, mostly accepted ones in the field, the two factors is that they have been introduced by humans and they have a negative or they have an impact on something, like in this case, the native species. But I also want to mention that the definitions of invasive species or definitions in general in science can change according to the study. So what your question is and so on. And we have many around. Some of them you might have seen around here in Berlin. One very common or one very cute one in Germany is the raccoon. I really like that.
I've never seen a raccoon in Germany. I've seen one in Canada for the first time 2 years ago and was like, oh my God, a trash panda. I just loved it so much. And all the Canadians I was with, they were all like, yeah, it's a raccoon, like big deal. And I was like, no, I've never seen one. So you don't understand.
Yeah. I have not seen them here either.
Yeah.
But they are in Germany. They are here in Germany.
They're hiding from us.
So most of them, of the animals that you see here, or the plants as well, have been introduced on purpose. So the raccoon was released on purpose. The crayfish there in the middle is one that is a very common pet for people who have aquariums.
Ah.
And then many times, I mean, obviously, we cannot really say, okay, yeah, this is because someone threw out their crayfish here, but it is assumed that sometimes people get rid of the pets because either your aquarium doesn't look so well or you don't want to have it anymore and you don't want to kill the animal. So then you release it to the wild. But the thing is that in this case, they don't belong there and they can become invasive. So it's a problem. But others have been introduced to enrich the local fauna, like the Egyptian goose. I forgot the English. I have to move us around in this screen. And others have been brought to a certain place, what I call introduced, because they're pretty, like the water hyacinth or the giant hawkweed. And the last one here, the Asian hornet, which looks quite threatening to me.
Yes.
That some of them come by accident. So they have not necessarily been introduced on purpose, but they come either in our containers, in our ships, in our packages from some place. And yeah, there are many, many examples, but I just wanted to mention some that you can easily see around in Europe.
That hornet, man, I would run away.
Yeah.
It looks huge.
Yeah, there's some news coming up of this killer hornets. Also in the US, they were freaking out because they had some new sightings of hornet. I don't know exactly if it's this one, but it's one of these big ones that come from Asia.
Someone actually on YouTube said that at Edersee, the raccoons are quite like a plague because there are loads of them. So I guess if you want to see them, we can do a little trip to that lake because people are just overrun by raccoons apparently. So the more you know.
Yeah, I mean, and raccoons. So like animals are a bit more difficult to see what to do when they become invasive because animals are more like you have to kill them. So it's a bit more complicated. Especially raccoons, like they're super cute.
Yeah.
But yeah, there can be a problems with for local animals. So you have to try to see. So I prepared like this little guessing game. It's a Berliner edition, but I mean, people can also guess if they want about whether this species is native or not to Berlin. So you can write it in the chat in YouTube, or maybe in the chat here if you want. Otherwise, Francie, you're in the spotlight to play.
I must say, I've done this before with my former speaker, Marta, who I think is also here today. And she talked about if something is an algae or like a water plant. And I was wrong like every single time. So you might see me being like humiliated now. So, but I'll try my best. You know.
Come on. No, I'm sure you will be great.
Okay.
So the first one is I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say the name in German. Biberratte.
Yes, Biberratte.
So it basically looks like a big rat. I mean, I still find it kind of cute, but it is kind of.
It's more chubby.
Yeah, exactly. But it's definitely bigger, right? But it has like the tail.
Yeah.
And you can find it on the side of waterways, like canals or rivers.
All right.
So,
lots of people are voting on YouTube.
Okay.
I try not to be persuaded by what they say. I'm gonna say it is native, so it's not an alien. It is native to here. I'm gonna say.
Okay, so we have used it. Not alien, so native. Okay, we have 3 aliens and 2 non-aliens. And I think in the chat we don't have no one here in the.
No, there was one.
So more
Anna said it's an alien, and then 1, 2, 3 people on YouTube said it's an alien, and I said it's not an alien, and one more person on YouTube also said it's not an alien. So it's like 4-2.
Okay, so it is an alien. It's not a Berliner. It's a fellow from my land.
Ah, I see. You tricked me.
So it's called coipus, or we call it coipo. Coipo, yeah. But it's also called. I prefer to put the name Nutria there because I think it's more general. But we call it coipo, and it's native in parts of Argentina, not all Argentina.
Okay.
And there is also very difficult to see it. Whereas here I've seen it, I think 3 or 4 times.
Oh,
already.
really?
Yeah.
I've only seen real rats, so.
Those as well. Also invasive in many cases, so it's a good example.
To my porch, especially. I don't want it here.
Yes, definitely. And the other one now is the beaver.
Okay.
Swimming thing.
Normal beaver then. Then I'm going to say the normal beaver is a Berliner then.
Let's see. This one is a tricky one. I want to see.
Oh, okay, tricky. So we have one so far on YouTube who says it's an alien. And Marta and I both thinks it's native.
Okay, let's see.
Beaver is ein Berliner, says someone on YouTube. Yay!
So it is.
I always think of Canada when I think of.
Yes,
beaver.
exactly. And that's my point right now. So if you see in the map, there's the red part where this is the European beaver. I actually did not put that on purpose in the name. But we also, yes. But you also have the Canadian one, so the North American one. And that one is invasive in Northern Europe. So you can see it there in the map. It's kind of like in a pinkish color up there. And the Canadian one, so the North American one, is invasive in Argentina, super invasive.
Oh, okay.
Very, very problematic in Patagonia.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was a tricky one because it depends if you're referring to the European or not. But this one is a Berliner. And let's see this one.
Is that the same?
It's the same, sorry. Yeah, it's just wanted because sometimes you might see when it's growing a little bit, so the leaves, the resprouts, or the little trees. It's a tree. It's a legume, so it means that it has this little bacteria that in the roots help them fix nitrogen. And it's very pretty. And you can see them everywhere in Berlin as well.
Let's see. Well, I'm going to say it's an alien. I'm going to say it's an alien.
I'm going to see if someone else is rescuing. Okay.
Someone on YouTube says it's an alien with lots of exclamation points. And someone else is also alien. So 3 of us saying it's an alien.
Yeah. So if you are in other parts of Germany, you may have seen it as well.
Someone says old alien.
Yes, true. Very old. So this one is also not a Berliner. It's from North America. So you see, we are like sharing between America and Europe. Things have been moved around.
First point for me. No, second point for me. Right?
No, third one. I think you're being...
The first one was wrong.
No, true. You're right. Okay. I'm giving you points.
Oh. All right.
And this one is called Goldenrod, the common name, Solidago.
Goldrute. Okay. I'm gonna go with alien. It's not native.
Just because. But have you seen them?
I have seen them. It's just that it looks like it shouldn't be here. I don't know why. It's just I look at it, I'm like, you don't belong here. Some people say alien, even though it's really pretty. Alien. One person said it's native.
So the common agreement seems to be alien.
Yeah, I think so.
So yeah.
See, Canadian again.
Yeah, Canadian again, indeed. So it's native to North America, and it has been introduced here because it's pretty. So actually, that was a very good point.
So on purpose.
Because it's so this one and the same with Ravinia, it has been introduced as an ornamental. So for parks or for gardens because it looks nice. So many species of plants have been moved around for those reasons.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's very common. I did that, well, not so many times before I knew about invasive species. The thing of saying like, oh, I love this plant when you travel to some place and then you want to take seeds or something like that. Well, not good to do.
No, you live here now. If you like, I've been to Canada a few times, and every time I think about how I wish we had maple trees so I could have maple syrup all the time. That's not as expensive. Because if you buy the good stuff, it's quite expensive from Canada. Like if you get it from like Montreal, that area, Quebec. Oh yeah. And just, get a few like seeds, have like a little backyard maple station.
But how many trees do you need to get? Like,
oh my God, I have no idea. I'm just dreaming of pancakes with syrup. That's I haven't looked further into it, but I think I heard from someone who is from Ontario, whose grandma has like maple trees or something. They make their own maple syrup, and you kind of like tap the tree, right? Like they have like a whole like instrument for it, where like a huge funnel thing. And they made it themselves. But I think if you want to use it for yourself, you don't need that much. But if you want to mass produce it, obviously you need a lot. But if someone would introduce maple trees to Berlin, I wouldn't be mad. I'm just saying.
I mean, there must be some maple trees in the botanical garden, but
That's true.
I don't think you will be allowed to
Tap that tree. No,
from there.
I actually worked there for a while. We can talk about that later. But yeah, it's a good place to go if you want to see cool plants.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most beautiful places in Berlin. Actually, I don't know.
I like it a lot.
In my opinion. So that was all.
Well done, everybody. Well done.
I think overall, yeah. And many of the people were not in Berlin, so that's a good guess.
Mm-hmm.
And well, now I wanted just to give a brief explanation of how do the species get here. So I may already have given it up with my explanation before, but we're basically moving them. So we move a lot. These are the routes for air travel. So we move a lot. And we bring species with us, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not, but we're constantly maybe bringing seeds in our shoes or ants in our luggage, things like that. And we are moving because we are also increasingly moving. So maybe not now with the whole pandemic situation, but in usually we are increasing the times we can have trips to some part of the world compared to maybe 10 years ago. We're also moving more and more species with time. So this graph that I show you here in the lower part, you see the years, and it's trying to show the first record rate of species. So every time someone said, oh, okay, I have never seen this species here, and this species is not native to here. So it comes from other part of the world. And it's what you can see here is basically that it's increasing, and that we have not seemed to reach a point where it's okay, it's sort of like the curve is flattening, it's still going up. Now we are quite aware of what flattening the curve means.
Yeah.
For bad reasons, but oh well. And we also bring some hitchhikers with us as well. And so this graph that is actually from work from my husband, so I'm like advertising. What he shows here is, so you have in blue is the more intentionally moved species, and in red here down is the more unintentionally moved species. So sometimes obviously there are species that you move intentionally, but also by accident, because for example with plants, maybe you want to move the plant for having it in gardens and so on, but maybe the seeds got mixed with other seed mixtures and they were brought by accident, and that also has happened. So it's common. And so with plants and vertebrates, so the bony animals, we tend to move them more on purpose. And it makes sense because they're big, so they're more difficult to just
notice them. You notice them.
But with other things, so with, for example, insects or algae, fungi, and so on, we tend to move them by accident. Maybe we wanted to move to have a certain species, a certain plant, and we brought some soil with it, or we brought the plant itself and it came with some pathogen. And well, the one that I mentioned was the Asian hornet, but I also wanted to put this other sad example, which is the grapevine downy mildew, because it's native to North America, but it was introduced by accident in Europe, and it has caused also a lot of damage in wine. So it's
no.
Yes, it's very sad.
We have, before you go on, a little question from Anna. I don't know if is it okay if I ask it now for her?
Yes, sure.
So she said she asked, in global comparison, is Australia dealing least with invasive species or plants because they have super strict rules? I heard that is Australia and like New Zealand have really strict rules, even if you want to bring your own pet home on a plane, for example.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we see that right now with the COVID situation, we see that very well with how well islands who have put very strict measures of how people come into the islands, they are very successful at controlling the spread of COVID. Well, the same thing happens with the plants or animals or things like that. So places like particularly New Zealand, they're very strict. And so they really check. I have never been there, unfortunately, but from what I know, they check like your shoes, your luggage, and all these kind of things that to see that you're not bringing anything to the island. So they are very successful at controlling. They still have invasive species, of course, particularly New Zealand and Australia. I mean, many of the places that used to be colonies had Europeans bringing so many species there. So they have very problematic ones, but I think they're very successful in controlling the species. And they also have very strict, it's called risk assessment. So so evaluating every species that you might want to bring to the country for economic reasons. So you can maybe check from what this species, if the species maybe was invasive in other places, or if it has certain characteristic that you think like, this can be problematic, like they reproduce quite well or quite fast, things like that. I mean, I'm just saying general things. So then you might double think if you want to have that species there. So for some economic reasons, you should not, or you're not able to say, no, don't bring anything. So that's why they try to do this risk assessment to say, okay, this is more risky than the other one. But yeah, I don't know Australia, actually. I have to,
I know they're quite strict there.
Yeah, I can imagine so. But I know like New Zealand is like the golden example for that.
Yeah.
And I mean, with COVID, they have done also very well.
True.
So yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, it is also very difficult. And for example, if you want to do similar things in Germany, well, it's very difficult to try to control in the borders of Germany with, I don't know, Italy or something like that, because there are no controls. It's more difficult. But if you're coming only by plane or by ship, and then that's it, then the screening is easier to do.
True.
Okay, so we also, the other point that I wanted to make is that we also move them around. Once we bring them here, they might be growing well, but not really spreading so much. So we might see them in one garden, but not so much more. But we also can move them by accident. And I find this video really great. So they did this experiment where this is some people from Berlin as well. So Moritz von der Lippe, he is a professor at the Technical University of Berlin. So they did this experiment and they put the seeds, this here are seeds, and they wanted to measure how far you can move them with just passing by with a car. And it's very interesting.
Oh.
And you can see how they move really further away, and that's only one car.
Yeah. If this is like a highway or.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So that is an example of moving them by accident. So they are there. They can stick maybe to the wheel, to your car, the mud in your car, or they just can be moved by the wind. So that also happens. And the questions that I wanted to also talk about was why should we care? I mean, there are so many problems worldwide that one asks. I mean, I also ask myself many times, why care about this? And the one thing that is very convincing for politicians or for people as well is how much it costs. We don't really realize, like you think, oh, animals or plants, like how much can they actually cost in damage. But if you are like a person, like a farmer, or if you're a hunter, you know that they have impact. Or if you have like wine production, like in the case of the mildew. So this is an estimation from a now old paper, I would say. It was the first one that tried to estimate how much invasive species cost. But it also has been quite discussed because it's not so difficult to estimate how much invasive species cost. Like if you have to maybe quantify how much it is to get rid of them in terms of how many people have to hire, or the machines you need, or things like that, okay, that is easy. But how can you quantify ecological damage, like the loss of species or stuff like that? It's very difficult. But just to have a number, and as a reference to this number, I put the Argentina's 2018 GDP, which is a little bit more than the cost of this per year. So it is quite significant in terms of how much money it costs. So even if we don't see them directly, like doing stuff, they're actually damaging our ecosystems or our economy and so on. And the other reason...
We have a question that actually fits that, because you said even if you can't like see them, they do cause this problem. And someone on YouTube asked, how do you research for the history of invasive plants? Do you use old diaries or old pictures? Like if you are a researcher now, how do you know if a plant is invasive now and it wasn't like 200 years ago?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's a hard question, I think, right?
It is. Yes, it's very difficult. And for example, the perfect example for that is Hawaii. So Hawaii, they have many invasive species there. And they know that they're invasive because they know that, for example, they're European or they are South American. So the assumption is, okay, the species could not arrive there by itself. Mm-hmm. It was introduced there. But you also have diaries. So there's actually a very nice video. It's a TED Talk by Angela Moles, and she explains how there was a big association of people who were introducing certain species to places like Australia. I think mostly colonies, but I'm not sure. And they had a very neat record of what they were introducing, how they were behaving, and how successful they were. So there are also records. But in the case of Hawaii, it's not very clear what was there before, because everything was just cleared out when the Spanish conquerors arrived. So they just cleared most of it, and they planted sugarcane. Mm-hmm. So what was there was never really checked.
Right. Okay.
So what you assume is, okay, these plants are in the islands close by, so then we're probably native to there. But sometimes it's very difficult to have a reference. And in Europe, what you have as a reference is when America was incorporated as a colony, there was a very big influx of species. So the species that came to Europe after that were, in many cases, I assume, recorded, like they knew what they were bringing. These are called neophytes. But before that, there were also movement of species between Asia and Europe. And those are a bit more difficult to know, like, should you consider them invasive or not? These are usually called archaeophytes. So they were there before America, but where they are native and so on is a bit more not so clear. Mm-hmm. But yeah, in essence, many times you have for example, herbarium collections or museum collections that you know, okay, this was collected in this area, and you can also know when the species appeared because maybe someone found it and they got like a sample of that, and you know that maybe that species is from another place. And so this is the kind of
That's
things
true.
that gives you a hint of, okay, this is probably not a new species, but rather like one from another place.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my job at the botanical garden. I worked in the herbarium and I preserved samples of plants that botanists have collected, like abroad or something, and we digitalized it so people could also see it online and stuff. And the detail that is on these labels, like they even write down what time of day they collected this plant in like Peru and what kind of hill it was, and if they can now, they have like coordinates and they write everything down. So you have lots of information where something is from. It's really cool. And if that helps to also determine if something is invasive or how things get invasive, and you can look at these old herbarium documents, it's really super interesting. But I guess there are a few ways you can determine, like old records and just knowledge that you already have about a certain plant, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, but as I mentioned, it's very difficult to say because you also like it's saying, okay, this one is native to this area can be quite artificial as well. Like maybe you did not find it there in some other places before, but it was there. So it's usually you say it's really like an alien species when you are quite clear that, okay, this definitely does not belong here.
Right.
But with some, it's a bit more difficult, especially now under climate change, that native species may be moving, for example, within Europe, but in countries where you wouldn't normally find that species. Then the question is, should we consider those invasive or not? Right. That's an open question as well.
Tricky.
So many questions.
So why should we care?
So the other reason is because, well, for example, this was a recent report from 2019 from the IPBES. So this is the International Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It's a group of scientists that try to assess what is the current situation with our biodiversity and what are the threats to it. And they determined that actually alien invasive species are quite important. So they are one of 5 culprits of biodiversity loss. Because of this kind of thing, either they compete with the native species or they change the situation where the natives usually would live, making it unsuitable for them and so on. But another thing that might be a consequence of this is that as a very, I mean, it's not necessarily right now that we have that, but we might end up having this more homogeneous sort of flora and fauna. So if we have, similar to what happens in cities, like that you tend to see certain trees or certain animals that occur that you see in many cities throughout the world. And this is kind of this homogenization, so that you have the similar set of species in throughout the world. Obviously, there are limits to that because not all species can grow or can live happily in every part of the world, but it's a consequence that might happen if we keep moving them around. And the one that we are quite familiar now in this situation is the impacts on human health. The one here is one plant species that I work with when I was doing my PhD, and it's called ambrosia or ragweed. It's native also to North America, And it has, the problem that it has is the pollen is very, very allergenic. Like, I mean, every plant obviously have pollen and it could cause allergies to some people, but this is particularly bad. Yeah, exactly.
I have a lot of plant allergies.
Not a good, not good news for you,
No.
Nancy. So yeah, this is here in Europe, and it's quite a problem because you can find them in roadsides, and you saw how we moved the seeds. So
oh God, yeah.
And the other one is in the end coronavirus. So I mean, it's not. I wouldn't say it is like an invasive species, but these researchers in a paper published last year, they were trying to show how similar these pandemics can be to how invasive species also spread, so move around. And what they have here is time. So as time progresses, and then the abundance of the species, or how much it costs to control it, and how far away from the initial point they have moved. And obviously, with pathogens, it's not so easy to say, oh, they're native to an area or not, because they rather have evolved in a certain area. So that is kind of a bit more, a bit different from invasive species. But the point here is how to show that while we're moving around, so in this phase, like humans are moving this pathogen, but it's the same thing, like people move species around, and as they are more abundant and it's more costly to try to get rid of them, and when they become really widespread, then they, in the case of the SARS-CoV, it's a pandemic, but in the case of invasive species, it's also quite impactful as well. So it has very negative, I don't want to say impacts again, but effects on them. And yeah, and how management can also be similar. So the idea that these researchers had was to show like how similar they are in many ways, or how we can think in similar ways when about pandemics or invasive species spread, and how these two fields can work together also to figure out how to better manage these situations. So yeah, similar to what we are experimenting. And as in many fields, there are many things that we don't know about invasive species. So one problem is that invasives are very, very complicated. So either we tend to talk about context specificity. So one species might be invasive in one area, but not in other area, although maybe climatic conditions might be similar. And so you need to understand, okay, why is this that? Do we have maybe an insect that is eating that plant and not eating it in another place? So there are so many variables sometimes that it's very difficult to understand why it is invasive, why it's not invasive. And it just adds complexity to the thing. So there are many things. It's not that you can say, okay, we study all these invasive species and then we know everything about it. There are many things to know. And the other thing is, I mentioned many negative impacts, but it's very difficult to try to standardize them as well. So you wanna try to classify species in the bad guys or the okay species or those are not really harmful. But that is very difficult as well, and try to find a way that would suit every country or every region is quite difficult, especially also because some species might be completely negative for some countries, but in other areas, maybe they actually like them or they use them, and so they have more positive effects, for example.
Yeah, that was the question. Yeah, that was the question of someone. I was just going to read it, and now it's in the chat here too. Someone asked if they also positive examples of an invasive species or if they're also always neutral, or are they always bad? Someone said
No.
potatoes are a good example of invasive species.
Well, they are invasive in the sense that we are eating them a lot.
I had potato soup earlier. I love potatoes.
Yeah, but they're still under control, so that is still okay. I mean, although we might want more potatoes in the street, I guess. No, it's true. There are positive impacts. I've concentrated a lot on the negative, and that's one big criticism that we have in the field, that we don't mention the positive ones. Mm-hmm. So many times the species have been introduced because, for example, in the case of the coipo or the nutria, for the fur. So that was the initial idea why they were introduced. So in essence, that is a positive impact. So you can get money out of a certain species. Or, for example, in South Africa, one of the best wood for barbecue was or is from an invasive tree. Oh. And many times they also have positive impact in terms of the perception. So if you're walking in the city and you see these beautiful flowers, even if it's all of these flowers and nothing else, you might think like, oh, this is super beautiful, and I really appreciate this. So that is a positive impact as well, is in the health or well-being of the people who get a nice feeling out of it. So there are as well positive impacts. That's why also it's so important to assess the impacts, to try to see, okay, are they all negative, or are they more on the negative side, or are they more on the positive side? And there's one last one here, the socioeconomic impact. That is, so the researchers here, they try to also incorporate this, because sometimes, okay, they might have negative impact, but people like them because it gives them wood, and maybe you cannot really quantify that, but people appreciate them. And so that is also something to have into account. So yeah, definitely have also positive. And the last thing regarding this that I wanted to say is we still don't know in many, many cases how to manage them, how to get rid of them, how to, it's quite complicated. And each one of them needs sometimes its own research separately. So that is quite a challenge. But
there's a perfect question regarding the management of that.
Yeah.
Someone asked, how do you balance the positive and negative of an invasive species that have both? So if you have a plant that gives you lots of positives, maybe for, I don't know, food, but at the same time, it will suppress a different species that's native in this area. How do you, I don't know, balance, or how do you manage that, or how do you determine if it's worth it, if the benefits are worth it? How do you do that? How is there like a committee? Like how does this happen?
So that's a great question. Really, really good on the point. So the best way of managing species is that you bring together to the table all the people that are somehow affected by it. So it's not only government or scientists, let's say, but also maybe people who are making use of the species, or gaining some benefit, economical benefit. And then you try to balance, okay, how do we accept, for example, that these people can still use some of this or some areas where the species is, and the idea is to try to come to a decision on that together. Ideally, so I guess in many cases for scientists, you will have more the tendency that they will want to, if you're an ecologist, maybe you want to get rid of the species because you're thinking more on the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. If you're a politician, maybe as well, because if it's costing you money, because say it's a species that, like a woody species, like a tree that grows on the side of the roads, then it's a problem because you have to try to keep visibility for the cars. So you want to have like a nice clear area on the side, but people maybe want that species because it's nice, or because the wood is nice, or because birds also have nests in those trees. That also happen. So you have to try to put everything together and then decide. And again, it's context dependent.
Okay.
So yeah, it's complicated, but I think the best way, and it's not or it's mostly not the way that it's done, is to bring everyone together and try to decide, okay, how do we do this? But it's not always done like that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to show you where I work. I don't know if you want me to, if there are any questions or something, or
I'm keeping an eye on the questions.
Okay.
I think our museum team is too. So if there are questions coming up, I'm just gonna sprinkle them in.
Cool. So part of my work was in South Africa, and best place ever to work.
I have a friend actually, I think, who's watching right now, who's from there, and I think he's gonna appreciate that you said that.
Oh yeah, I'm so jealous. I want to live in your country. So I did part of my I did my first postdoc there, and it's a very, very nice place to work, and it's a very nice place to work if you work with invasive species, because there is a very important center for the research of invasive species in close to Cape Town, so in Stellenbosch. And so I heard about this place because in conferences I saw people working there, and I was like, I must go there. And that's how I ended there. And I worked in this awesome place. Like, the picture is not mine, unfortunately. Mine are more like fieldwork stuff. But the other pictures on the side, so the flowers, those are mine. And this place, the vegetation is called Fimbos. So this is the biodiversity hotspot without the S. That means that not only you have many, many species there, so there's a high number of plants, for example, but you also have plants that only occur here. So you can only find it in this area. And this is why it's so important to preserve this area, or to try to maintain the species in this area as much as possible. But many of these places, beautiful places, can become a not so beautiful place, like the one in the picture here. Which, I mean, now this tree is called acacia, or wattle. It's native to Australia. And it was introduced to South Africa for many reasons, but mostly to avoid degradation in dunes, so to what's called fixed dunes. So if you have plants there, then the wind will not blow away the sand. And they also tend to be quite beautiful. So the flowers on the top and the lower part are from this tree. So they're quite beautiful. But they can grow like a forest of this thing and nothing, or almost nothing else. And they also have the negative impacts that I mentioned. So they outcompete the native ones. The native ones are mostly shrubs or more herbaceous species, so forbs. And because they are bigger, they tend to take more water. And in these areas, water is very precious. So this is a big problem. And they also, because they are legumes, they change the soil conditions. So they can fix nitrogen. I'll come to that a little bit later, but they can change the soil conditions in the area, which is bad for the natives because then they cannot grow there. And so I just wanted to show you how you go about doing field work or doing experiments to try to see the impacts of this invasive species or what makes them successful in a certain area. And for doing that, what I did was, but it's very common practice, I would say, in the field, is to try to look for a place that is invaded and try to compare it to a place that is not invaded, that should be in close proximity, but not so close that it will be influenced by the invasive species. But in a way that you have similar soil, similar environmental conditions in the sense of weather, like it's not so different. So then you can compare and see, okay, if I sample, for example, the soil, I can compare because I assume that the soil should be similar enough if they are only 100 meters apart. And what I did was to take soil samples and to check what plants were there and so on. And this was part of my field work, but we have many other situations that were a bit more fun, not all work. And yeah, the one on the right is a sort of game that we invented. So there's a biological control for acacia that is that forms. So they form galls. It's like a woody thing in the tree.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically making it not grow so well and produce less seeds. Right. But it has this woody ball that you can take out, and we were playing. I would call it baseball, acacia baseball, but since it was South Africa, it was rather cricket. So we had fun with that. And the other part, I am trying to, it looks like watering native plants.
Yeah, it looks like you're watering the plants.
But we were trying to get chemical compounds from the leaves and the flowers. So we had a tray underneath, and the water had to go through the leaves and the soil, and we will collect that water and make experiments afterwards. So water plants with that to see if the chemicals in the plant have an effect.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, that is me still putting some trays under the soil in the first one. Yeah. Some lab work. This is the kind of things we find sometimes when we get to the lab. And then greenhouse experiment. That one is actually from my PhD with my friend Ana Clara, who was helping me.
Cool.
And yeah, and this is more from South Africa. My friend Jan Hendrik and Johnny. Poor Johnny was doing some field work. We were
and you were playing.
Yeah, with my friend Anna, we were making faces while he was concentrated. And that was me in the middle with, we got a machete. It was supposed to be for cutting of acacia, but it was not so sharp. So in the end, it was only for photo sessions.
Funny.
And my friend Jan Hendrik on the left, he was the one who made me love Fynbos. So he's really great Fynbos lover, and helped me a lot to get to learn how to work there. Oh God, he was also the one that was saying like, yeah, there are snakes around. Yeah, I've seen some. And I was like, oh God, no.
I know what that's like.
So scared.
Yeah, I'm really scared of snakes, and I did some field works a few times in Montana in the US, and they have rattlesnakes. And
oh God,
you sleep in tents, right? You just sleep outside, and I would be terrified that there would be a snake crawling or slithering into my tent. I would be just horrified, and everybody would be like, "Oh yeah, we found one the other day," or they would have,
exactly,
bull snakes, and bull snakes are not venomous, but if you have a bull snake, you won't have a rattlesnake because they have the same kind of fish, so if you have a bull snake, that's actually quite good for you. But I want no snakes. None of them are. Take them away.
Same here. So I heard about the snakes, but I was like, I mean, I only few times saw a snake in Mendoza or in Argentina, where I'm from. So I thought, okay, like you don't see them so often. And this picture on the left, actually, it was my first field work with him. And after we were in the first site and we were talking, and I said like, but you never see snakes here, right? And he was like, no, yeah, I saw one
right there
last time. Yeah, over there. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be here. I was so scared. But then you get used to it, and you just have to be careful, and it's okay. But
Yeah, the joys of field work.
Yeah, so there are some ticks and things like that, but you manage. I mean, I'm a city person after all. So if I manage, everyone can manage. And you're visiting their home after all.
That's true.
So yeah, talking about that, some people or some things might not be so happy about us being around. So we had some visitors in our plots.
You look so unhappy and chunky.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Spoiler alert. Yeah, he was really cute. So, okay, so once you do your experiments or we did our field work, then we collect the data. And the most important part, I think, or one of the most important part is to analyze that data. So to bring it to the computer and do some stats, because you might get the feeling, oh, okay, I think that is, I don't know, invasive because of this reason. But if you don't try to see it from a statistical standpoint, then you cannot really say that there is a difference, for example, between treatments. And sometimes you get reviewers that are very tough, like the little one here, and makes also working quite difficult. But okay, so just to show you a bit what I found in South Africa in my work there. So as I mentioned, acacias are legumes. They fix nitrogen with the help of some bacteria called rhizobia. And this nitrogen goes to the leaf to help them photosynthesize more. But once the leaves goes to the floor or the soil and they decompose, this nitrogen change the soil condition, but also the bacteria that are in the soil. And all these changes help them spread, so like grow even further or grow better in the area. But these conditions are bad for the native ones because the natives are not used to this high nutrients there. So my work, which is still in progress, was to see how long these effects last and and how they affect the recovery of the species. Mm-hmm. So the invasive species are in general, the plant species are very closely related to the soil communities, and so the bacteria, the fungi, and the conditions there, because the soil communities, they are processing the leaves, processing the roots, the root exudates, so the chemicals that comes from the root. So it's very, very closely related. And that's why I also got more interested in the bacteria part, because I always thought, okay, if I only concentrate on the plants, I'm missing one part. But obviously there are always another layer that you're missing. So for example, the insects also have an impact or have an effect. Mm-hmm. But I do not see the insects, or I do not study the insects, but my husband actually was looking at that in the same plots. So we were working together there.
We have two questions before we go on that might fit that. So Anna asks, how long does it take for an invasive species to assimilate to the host ecosystem and become part of the norm? Like, how long, like potatoes. We both love potatoes, so I think that's her example. How long does it take for a plant basically to become part of the ecosystem like it was always there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So again, it's context dependent. So it really depends on the species and on the place. But usually if you might remember the graph that I had with the COVID situation, so this S-shaped graph. So they usually, if you have time and you have how much of that invasive species you have, usually you have a phase where that invasive species is in very low numbers. So it is there, but it's not doing anything. It's just more or less growing in the same place. If it's a plant, you might have several individuals, but they are just in that patch. So they are not moving much around. And that phase before they become invasive is usually called the lag phase. So it's like the lag before it becomes invasive. And that can be different for the species and for the place. usually, for example, trees tend to have longer lag phases until they become invasive. So there's a study also from scientists here in Berlin. And he found that trees, I think it was from Berlin, actually take way longer, like in the maybe 100 years to become invasive since they were introduced for the trees that are invasive now in Berlin. So yeah, it depends. But maybe if you take that same tree species to another part, maybe the conditions of the environment, so like the climate is better, so it grows better, or the soil is better, and so it can be faster at becoming invasive. So it really depends. And another point, which I did not mention up to now, is how many of these plants or animal you bring. Because if you're constantly bringing more, for example, seeds of a plant, you might get in the end, and from different parts, for example, from different what we call populations, so different patches, they might be more genetically diverse, and then they maybe that helps them become invasive because they have the genetic diversity might help them adapt to different conditions more quickly. So that depends. How many we bring also depends, because not only because of that diversity, but also because some of them might die. But if you keep bringing them, then you have more chances that they actually become invasive. Right. So for example, animals, like you might bring a couple of them and then they die. But if you keep bringing more animals, then eventually some of them will survive and then they can become invasive.
All right.
And there was a second question, I think.
Yeah, it says, where would it end when we wouldn't mind about invasive species besides economic issues? I guess if we just ignore the fact, like, okay, it happens, but we don't do anything about it. Is there a scenario, like a picture where in the press discuss climate scenarios, which we would want to avoid? So I guess if we would just not do anything about them and the effect it would have, I assume.
Yeah, so there is another, recently there have been some, I don't know if I call it like movement or another perspective, let's call it, of what is called novel ecosystems. So this will be like plants or animals, like a set of species that will not normally or not naturally occur or be together, but they are because we maybe put them together, or could also be because of climate change. Maybe they now they wouldn't be here, but now the weather is good here, so they can grow here. And this novel ecosystem, like cities can be novel ecosystems, for example. It's sort of an artificial set of species in a way. They will not be naturally there, but they are, and they can actually grow there with no problem. So there is not like a garden may not be a novel ecosystem necessarily, because you do have to put water or, I don't know, nutrients or things like that for it to have those species there. But maybe if you just abandon them and you still get invasive species mixed with natives and stuff like that, then that could be a novel ecosystem. And there is some people who says, well, at a certain point, we just cannot spend money to try to restore or fix this ecosystem. We should just leave it like that. Or in many cases, we actually might want to have that ecosystem because it gives us some benefits, some resources that we want. So yeah, it's kind of like, I think in the end you have to say, okay, how much would it cost me to try to reverse this? And how much can I gain from it, maybe? And from there decide. But it's also context dependent as well. There is a lot of criticism about that, because some scientists say, well, that's kind of like a get out of jail card. Like, okay, then maybe governments would say like, well, let's not do anything about it because, well, why not?
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to evaluate and say, well, is it worth investing maybe infinite amount of money for something that in the end is not really possible to reverse or to fix? So yeah, tricky as well. But it's a very good question.
We still have like half an hour to go.
Okay.
So how about we go on? Because I also have some questions.
Yeah. Sorry.
No. It's super interesting. I love all the questions. They're like really always really good topic, like really good along the topics that you're talking about, the questions.
Yeah.
I'm really impressed. Yeah.
We got a lot of invasion scientists in the audience, I think. Very good.
I love this picture.
So yeah, this is a very brief last thing. So during the lockdown, I basically started my position while being in my 8th month of pregnancy. So I only work 1 month and then I was on leave. But the thing is that I started officially then my position in the middle of a lockdown. So I had plans of maybe doing lab work or field work, and that was really not possible this year or last year, actually. So but what we tried to do, and I think many of us tried, was to go out every day for a walk.
On that walk, yeah, that's the highlight of my day. Just
exactly.
Be outside.
Yeah, exactly. And so we realized with my husband that we were looking more at what is around us, because I mean, from the pictures you saw before, I was way more in the field, but before coming to Berlin, I'm not an urban ecologist yet. I hope to be at some point. But I realized that I was sort of blind to the plants and the things around us. So yeah, we started to look around and we saw these plants that I know are invasive. So the one here up the logo here is Solidago, so the Goldenrod, Solidago canadensis. And they are, you can find them in a way that you clearly can see that they are escaping some gardens. So we started this, what we call alien escapist project, which is really slowly moving because it's on the side of the work. But an example of one of this garden escapists is this Solidago canadensis in this garden close to home. So all of that is Solidago canadensis. And those are the seeds for the future ones. And then they are escaping on the side, if you see here.
Oh, you can see it so clearly. Like I've never paid attention to that. I just thought like
yeah, and here as well there were some weeds, but they got they probably had herbicide or something spread there.
Yeah.
But all those seeds that you saw there, they fly very easily. So imagine that is potential invasive species right there. So we thought about doing an experiment in our balcony, because we had a really nice sun-facing balcony. And so we went to these places in Berlin and we collected soil from the Solidago canadensis where Solidago was growing. So that would be invasive soil. And then from close by areas where there was no Solidago. And well, this is a Goldenrod. And then we did the experiment in our balcony, making them grow. So we make one Solidago individual grow in the invasive soil and one in the not invasive soil, and the same with some native species. And we thought, okay, because of the things that I mentioned for other species before, that they changed the soil conditions and so on, we thought, well, the aliens should grow better in the invaded soil and the natives in the non-invaded soil. And this is the picture of the little experiment. And then the data collection in our balcony as well.
Oh yeah, you can see like the roots and the on top and stuff, right?
Well, this is still we collected the data, but it's still we have to wait. So you usually cut the pieces of the plant and then you weight it to see the biomass or the plant mass that gives you an idea of how well the plant is growing in a certain condition. But just to show a little bit of what we found, so this is the solidago, so the goldenrod. It was actually growing better in the native soil. There it was a bit taller, and I think again, I have not measured this, only how tall they were. They seem to be doing better actually in the native soil. But on the other hand, with the native species like this one, which is called Tanacetum vulgare, this one is actually doing better doing worse in the native soil. So here in the invasive is growing actually better. So this is a whole context dependency thing again. Like it's not so easy to say. But obviously we don't know yet what is in the soil. So I have the soil samples in my freezer. So that's still ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted to also try to share what we were finding and how we did this experiment and try to find out maybe if some other scientists doing urban ecology were interested in doing experiments. So that's why we also created this Twitter account. But again, it's going very slow because it's in the site as everything. But yeah, we're out there. You can follow us in Twitter. And yeah, and that's all from my side.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I loved all the pictures and I learned a lot. I cannot...
Wait, I will stop sharing. Okay.
It's I think it was super interesting because I had some knowledge, but obviously not like expert knowledge at all. Like I took a class on this and thought it was super interesting. But to hear from someone who is an expert is super great. And I have lots of questions for you. And we have a little bit of time still left. So if you're watching on YouTube or here and you have questions, post them in the chat. I'm going to read them out. Or, Anna has a question. So maybe...
Hi, Anna. I see you now.
I wonder what this
is.
Oh, there's is she going to take... Can you share pictures in the chat? I don't know. Oh, she has a hand. She has one in her...
Yeah.
It just shows up out of nowhere in my other pot, so I had to remove it. But it looks super suspicious. It's also very pretty. Now it's dead, but yeah, I don't know what is it.
Wait, I lost you. Yeah, I cannot really see it here.
It's dead, so maybe.
Okay.
It's
yeah.
on,
but maybe
on YouTube. It's
Wait,
a big picture. No, it's
here.
It just showed up in your pot.
Yeah, it's just like out of nowhere, it just grew, and then I was like, oh, it looks so pretty. Maybe it's just one of those garden random greens, but then no, it's growing to something pink. It was really pink in the summer, and yeah, and I really don't know what that is, but I wonder whether it's invasive.
I cannot really tell from the picture now, but we could maybe. Do you have Twitter? Also, can you send it to me via Twitter?
Yeah, I will take a picture and send it to you.
Yeah.
I'm super interested too.
Yeah, because here it's so cute. It's like it's very fluffy, but I think it may be invasive. So I removed it from my other plants, but I still keep it. But I'm curious.
I mean, to be honest, obviously this is not the room to classify invasive species, but what I always think is like, if it's coming out of nowhere and it's cute, it's probably invasive. But and sometimes you have them, or not necessarily invasive species, but what we call this weedy species. So can be native, but they behave sort of invasive. They are in the soil. So sometimes the soil has seeds, or sometimes they fly. They just fly to your pot. So if it's fluffy, the seeds, I guess it flew.
I think this part is the flower, and it's really pink and fluffy. Like it's really cute, and like it's like those fussy socks. It looks like that. So I don't know.
Do you also have a picture of what it looked like when it was blooming?
I think I have a picture, but I have to look it up. I have to look it up.
If you find it, definitely send it to us on Twitter or on Facebook.
to the
I
balcony.
can definitely.
Invade my indoor plants. Okay, I will send you a picture later.
Thank you.
I could definitely recommend. There's an app called Flora Incognita, and it's for Germany, and it's super good. So I go around with this to identify the plants, because I'm no expert of plants here in Europe.
Super interesting though. Really cool. We never had that before where someone is like, what is this? But
I really want to know now.
Yeah, I have a question concerning botanical gardens. And like, because we talked about it before, I thought this question fits well. Because they have plants from all over the world, or from outside of Berlin. And is there ever, like, are there problems with cross-pollination, or plants, or the wind carrying out pollen of invasive plants? Because I know we had some plants that are supposed to grow only in the Alps. And I was thinking, what if it gets blown out of the botanical garden and it suddenly grows at the side of the street? Is that a problem for the ecosystem in cities?
So botanical gardens used to be quite a problem in terms of invasions, in the sense, like, it's not that you can always blame the botanical garden, but there was a paper, I think maybe 5 years ago, I'm not sure. So he did, like, it's a researcher from New Zealand, and he did an analysis to see like the species that are invasive in a certain city, and if they were in the botanical garden, and many of them were actually in the botanical garden. And so they suspect that many times the botanical gardens actually are a source for invasive species. And I'm pretty sure that there are documented examples, but I don't have one now. But what you say about crossing is also possible. Yes, you also can have, like, hybrids, like two very closely related species might produce a hybrid. And I think that also happened in the past, but right now there's way more information. So botanical gardens are careful now.
Yeah.
So they are part of the solution now. But the not only botanical gardens, but also gardens of people as well. And what is very good for a thing that botanical gardens can be really useful is to anticipate the effects of global change. So climate change, sorry. For example, you might observe that certain species that maybe was not really moving from that area where it was planted now is starting to spread a little bit more. So you can detect that already from a botanical garden. And the fact that you have maybe many botanical gardens that have the same species also can help as an experiment. I mean, that's out of the top of my head. I don't know. That actually is kind of cool. I would think maybe someone already did it.
Interesting. Okay. Let's see. I have to be a bit selective now about my questions.
Sorry, I talk too much.
Something I always like to ask is, let's start with this one. What is the worst part of your job?
Worst part?
Yeah. We know there's
Ticks.
always something.
Ticks in the field.
Oh my God, yes.
They're disgusting.
Okay, that is a very good answer, because I also hate them. Yes, ticks. I had to do lots of field work for university. You know, you like climb up a hill and look at some like geology like stuff.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like yes, as soon as I see one, my day is ruined.
I do not have, I may have some picture somewhere, but like I try to put my socks on top of my pants so they will not like crawl inside.
Yeah, I did that. What in contrast, what is the best part of your job? What do you enjoy the most?
I like a lot being out there, but I have to say, like, it's in the same level as the creativity or the curiosity that you can have with this job. So the fact that you can think of a question and in general, there's no one really telling you, okay, no, you cannot really research on that. It's rather, okay, maybe that's not so interesting or someone did it, but you do have a lot of freedom to ask your own questions. And then, especially if you are an ecologist, but other, like as you mentioned, also geologists or paleontologists, being out there is also super nice.
Yeah, that's my favorite bit, the field work. And seeing something that maybe, or like being in a part of the planet where not many people hang out and you're like on your own, or you're in it, well, with the team, but if you get to experience part of the world you haven't been in, that's definitely one of my favorite bits. But you already talked a bit about the current situation. It's like I usually ask how the situation, lockdown and everything changed how you work, but you went into that a lot, where you just made your own experiments, and I think that is super cool. And did you start right at the beginning of last year, or was it more when you became bored at home? When exactly did you start with your home experiments? Was it spring?
It was should have been spring, because so I came back from maternity leave in mid-April, was middle of lockdown, but I was already collecting seeds for potentially doing an experiment during winter, when I was going out with the baby, like with my coffee, and not slept enough.
Oh no. So you're a mom, and being a mom is already very hard, and being a mother in academia is, I think I follow quite a few mothers on Twitter, for example, and some of them are being very honest about how hard it is. And I know we talked about it, and I've seen your baby, it's very cute, and doesn't mean it's not, like, it's still hard. And do you feel like you have enough resources as a scientist and as a mother in academia to make it work? Like, because you're at home and your family is at home, do you feel like there's a network you have that is helping you, or do you feel like really like on your own with this? Can you tell us a little bit about the experience? Because I can sympathize. Obviously, I'm not in your situation, but it feels hard. Do you get anything done?
That's a question. We should start like another event for this.
Another event, motherhood in academia. That's like
it's so I cannot complain personally. I have a lot of support from my husband, who is also a scientist, but he works less hours than me, so he goes and pick him up at the kita. So I get a lot of support from him, and which is, I know I'm lucky, because many times it's the other way around. Usually guys are the ones who are more advanced in the career. That's a whole other topic.
That's a whole other problem.
The other thing that really helps, which is a problem now, is having childcare, which here in Germany is a bit tricky, because you have it from like more or less available from around the year of the baby. So that can be tricky. It's not always like that, but it's more difficult to find a place before. So that is really essential. If you have daycare, you can work. I think that's for every woman in any field. Like if every family, not even women, like every family, like if you have childcare. So right now is super difficult, because he's around home. But I think the worst part, or the part that really affects women, is when to decide to have a family. So you always have, academia is really competitive, and you're measured by how many papers you publish, or that's kind of, I think, the way you're measured. So you're always thinking on, what happens if I get pregnant now? Like I will lose a year of publications, or so it's a difficult decision. And then sometimes it's still you have supervisors who are not so nice. I mean, I haven't had this experience, but I know of cases. So yeah, I think that is the most tricky part. Decide when to, like, okay, doing my PhD, doing my postdoc. If my postdoc project is only 2 years, should I do that? So that is the most difficult for me and for everyone, I think. But I've been lucky. I do have support. Obviously, if I would have my family, I see them in there. If I would have my family close by, that would be a different thing. Definitely.
Yeah. And I think you've been actually, so I have a lot of friends that are doing a PhD, and I actually almost did one, but then turned it down, not specifically for family planning, but it's definitely something I thought about. And it's like, okay, what if I do this now? This is going to be like 4 years in the best case. And if I would be doing a PhD now, then it would be in a pandemic. And part of that PhD would have been going to Patagonia actually to do field work. And like that, I don't think that's happening now, you know, so maybe it would take longer. And obviously women think about age and when I can do this, and lots of women leave academia. I think you're one of the few women I know that are doing a postdoc and doing research, because lots of them actually leave academia because they think you can't be a mom and also be a postdoc. Or you don't know where you're going to move. Do you want to uproot your family and then move to a different country because that's where the job is?
Yeah, exactly.
That is a big problem. And you do so many cool things, like a researcher, and we do like soapbox science together, and like you do so many great things. And you're a mom. I'm always thinking, like, how does she do this? She's a Wonder Woman. Well, honestly, like, you're a hero to me.
I mean, I sleep well. I'm among the lucky ones, but this is very also context dependent. There are moms or parents that have to deal with babies that don't sleep well in the night, and then obviously you cannot be very productive. And yeah, it's personal also how much you want to deal with work, stress, and family. I really like what I'm doing, and I'm really. I think for women it's not so well to say, so good to say, but I think I am ambitious in the sense that I want to become a professor, hopefully, eventually. So, but that is many times not well seen in society. So if you are a mom, then why are you ambitious for your career? You should be happy with what you have, right?
Yeah.
You should be focusing on your family, and that's it. But obviously you can be ambitious when you have support in your family. So that's also why you see more male representation in academia, because many times women are the ones taking care of the children or working less hours, and all that. And we have that situation the other way around in our family. So, but yes, definitely. And it is a problem, and it's this sort of scissors graph, so that you see, although there are more women doing PhDs, the ones that get the higher positions like professorships are way less, and the men tend to go up, so there are more professors. And even in Germany, which I thought was better, it's not good.
It's not
very
good,
low.
Yeah. So I love seeing women and mothers like you succeeding and doing both, you know, because it's hard, but you can if that's what you want.
Yeah, but I also want to say that you can, as long as you have help. Because that's also something that many people say, like, well, if I could do it, then everyone can do it. And that's not really true.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, of course. Yeah, and especially now, not everybody can have their family around because of lockdown, and then they're on their own. So I definitely like. It's a good position to be in. But yeah, I think it's really important to also show that it's possible for people that maybe don't know if that's for them, because that's my next question. Like, what advice would you give a young researcher, or even like someone who's still in high school, who might want to go into science, but that they don't know if they can do it, or they don't know if there's a place for them, because there are so many hurdles and doubts and questions. What is this one thing that you would tell someone who is unsure?
Well, I think really, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but really trust yourself. And I know we all have this feeling that we're not good enough, this famous imposter syndrome, especially women. But, and especially if you come from under or third world country, however you want to call it, many times you feel like you're less, like you're not at the level of people in, I don't know, the US or Europe. And so you really need to believe in yourself to push through it and start realizing like, oh, wow, yes, I can do this. So it's that, and that is the thing that you can control, but obviously trying to find the right supervisor as well, the right people to work with. Because if you have a very bad advisor or a very bad host, then that might be the end of your career for the wrong reasons. So choosing that, it doesn't, like I was very lucky. I did not really plan that so well. I was like, just give me the money. I want to do a PhD. But my supervisor we work together quite well. So I was very lucky. And my boss here in Berlin is great. And my boss in South Africa was great. So I've been very lucky. But I know people who don't have that experience, and you don't want to end up in a lab that is not supportive enough or that is making you feel bad. So it's like the two, like the growing yourself and the working with the right people.
That is true. I always had an amazing supervisor. So a woman, a mother. She was always really super encouraging, and I met her even before I started studying, because I interned at the museum, and she's been my supervisor basically throughout my academic career. But yeah, I heard from other people who don't have the same experience, or they wanted to get a PhD because they were worried they're not going to get a different PhD that maybe they applied for. You know, like you hold tight to what you get in some cases, and if that leaves you with someone or a group that you don't get on with, that makes or breaks the career, right? So I think people need to be very selective to like, do I want to work with these people? Check out if they have a diverse team. Because do you just want to work with men? I don't. I want to work with someone that people from all over the world, different genders, and that's something that's super important. So that's always my advice too. Like, look at the lab, look at them, like go through the websites. What does the team look like? I think that's and now with social media, lots of them have like Twitter accounts where you can see what kind of stuff they share, or that I think is a good a good indicator too of what they're like. So
and talk to people who work there as well.
Yeah.
To see how it is.
Yeah, like, do you like it here? Be honest.
It's difficult, I know, but
of course, yeah. Especially if your early stage career, you might be hesitant, but I think it's worth it, and it's good advice. That was good advice. Thank you. And yeah, I think there are no more questions. I just see on like YouTube where people say it was a great presentation. So thank you for joining. I learned a lot. It was so nice to have you here. And even though we did it remotely, I think we had lots of cool questions, and I liked your quiz and coffee. I saw a few people drinking coffee, and my coffee's empty now, just in time for the end of the presentation. If you want to find Flor or myself, you can definitely find us on social media. I think we posted the handles too. We saw it in your presentation. And the next Kaffee Klatsch is going to be in German, and it's on the 7th of February. So we're going back to our schedule of doing it the first Sunday of the month. And I'm very, very happy that you joined, and for everybody that joined today. And yeah, thank you so much. And if you have the time, do feel free to do the survey so we know what we can improve. And yeah, thank you so much for joining. Yeah, see you another time. And you can see lots of the previous recordings on the YouTube channel. And Flo, your video will be there eventually too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank
today.
you, Marta.
Yeah, thanks, Marta. Marta was actually a speaker in, was it September? October, early October.
Yeah.
Yeah, so see you next time in German again. I'm pretty sure we'll have English editions in the future as well. So keep an eye out for that on the museum website and on social media, and we will see you then. Thanks, Flor.
Thank you for inviting.